Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bourbon Note. I'm Greg.
I'm Ben.
And today, we're not drinking bourbon. Well, we should be drinking bourbon. So at some point, we're going to be drinking bourbon. All right, Ben, more importantly, what are we doing today?
Well, we're responding to a challenge
Okay.
from another great channel, Those Bourbon Guys.
Those Bourbon
Yeah, please
Guys.
go like, comment, and subscribe. We're a little bit late on this. They challenged us on this a few weeks ago, but our schedule has been a little bit off with filming.
Sometimes life gets in the way.
Yes, it does. It certainly does. So they did a video that was basically kind of, what did we start out drinking when we first kind of got into this whole whiskey thing? Okay. Versus what we're doing now. It's an interesting kind of topic because I think certainly our taste profiles and preferences for different flavors and whatever and proof points has changed.
Yes, I would agree.
So it's kind of a cool concept. So maybe to start it out, you didn't really have much of a pre-getting into bourbon out at the bars drinking.
That's true.
So you've talked about.
Yeah. So why don't you tell me
videos.
how you started out with?
So Wild Turkey.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. So back when, friends and I were just at the bar in our 20s, wanted to do shots, we would just get shots of Wild Turkey because it just seemed like the dirty old man whiskey.
And it was inexpensive.
Inexpensive, higher proof, and we thought that was funny to just drink Wild Turkey. Now, this was back just doing shots. So it was either like Wild Turkey or Jameson was kind of the thing. But, let's get this out of the way. My first actually getting into whiskey, like having a pour of whiskey and drinking it on the rocks, more like you're supposed to enjoy it on the rocks or neat or whatever, as opposed to taking shots of it, was actually, this is going to be a stand-in bottle. This is Maker's 46 cask strength, but it was actually Maker's 46.
Right.
And so a friend of mine brought a bottle over one night, and my father-in-law was in town, and they were having a pour on the rocks, and I just kind of thought to myself, I've never actually just tried that before. Just drink a whiskey, on ice. And I actually really liked it.
Okay.
And then kind of started to explore some other stuff. At the very beginning, I kind of got a little bit into Irish, and then I got a little bit into Scotch, and then I found my way to bourbon, even though I kind of started out with bourbon, because I had no idea what the difference between any of them were. Yeah.
And my story is going to be very similar.
Yeah. And one side note, when I got into this, how I started to learn about whiskey, because I just decided I'm interested in this, I want to learn more about it. You and I kind of have that in common. When we get into something, we really get into it. I just started watching videos, and I came across Whiskey Tribe, Whiskey Vault.
Yep.
It's Bourbon Night, all the kind of
others.
Channels that were around, back then.
Me too.
That are obviously still around, but that were still around back then as well. And just kind of went down a rabbit hole of learning as much as possible about whiskey making, the difference between all of them. And actually, when I got into bourbon, I had no idea there was this bourbon craze going on. And it had already started, and I had no idea. I just got into it because I thought it was cool.
Wow.
And I think, the only reason that there were so many resources on YouTube is because there was a bourbon craze, and then I slowly started to find that out.
Yeah.
So, what about you? What was your...
So, I didn't drink it all when I was younger, in my 20s. Around the age of 30 or so, I was really into red wine and started to explore that. And then eventually I started getting interested in whiskey to try it out. And it started with Scotch. And I found a couple of Scotches I liked, but I didn't understand Scotch. And it turned out the Scotches I liked were finished. Caribbean cask type finished or all the rest are sherry.
Scotches are aged in used casks anyway.
Yeah, they tend to be.
But yeah, some of them kind of lean heavier into different styles of that.
And eventually I tried an Irish, and they're good, but nothing. But then at some point I tried a Maker's Mark. Yep. And I was like, wow, that's different.
Yeah, totally different.
Way more aggressive. And so I picked up a few bottles of bourbon, did not understand what proof was. I know technically what it is, but I didn't understand I got a Knob Creek 120 proof. And didn't understand, and I thought it was just on fire, and didn't understand, 9 years and 120 proof, whatever that was just crazy.
Yeah.
It took a while to learn some of those kind of details.
There was a time, and that kind of will bring us into how we got to where we are, which is really the meat and potatoes of this video. There was a time when I was down at the liquor store when I first got into bourbon. I think I had heard of single barrels, but I didn't really know exactly what they were. And there was a Knob Creek sitting on the shelf, and it had a little silver tag, and it said, exclusively for this store. It's like, oh, that's one of those single barrel ones. That's cool. I'll buy this.
Okay.
And then I looked at it and it said 120 proof, and I was like, oh, no way. I'm not buying that. Who the hell would buy 120 proof? I was new at the time, and that just seemed like way too much. So that kind of shows, like, at least in that category, like, we love high proof stuff now. So I started out drinking lower proof stuff, kind of exploring.
Yep.
And you kind of did the same thing.
Same.
What are you like more into now that you didn't really know about or weren't into back then?
So one of the things that I thought is overdoing this show for the last 3 years, whatever it is.
It's coming up on that, yeah.
You definitely moved to liking higher proof stuff before me. Now, I liked higher proof stuff, but you were kind of like anti 80 proof stuff often.
Yeah.
And I was still okay with lower proof stuff.
He's referencing his affinity for Basil Hayden.
So, without saying Basil Hayden.
Yeah.
But eventually I got there. Like now at this point, I haven't actually revisited any of the Basil Hayden in quite a while.
Yeah.
But at this point, it would be hard for me to buy a brand new bottle of 80 proof bourbon.
I feel the same way. Like
I think 100 proof I'm really happy with. There's plenty of good ones. But 80 proof, they've just watered down too much.
Yep. The other thing that we've gotten really into recently, we've gotten more into finished whiskeys, but in particular, we've gotten very into rum finished rye, which is actually kind of two topics because we've gotten more into rye as we've been doing this channel.
Well, I would say a third topic real quick. I started out very early on trying to learn. Like I was really into, obviously, Buffalo Trace because all of their stuff is gold. And just discovering it's good, but there's other good stuff as well.
Yeah.
And so some of the other big brands. But I learned that MGP is the sourcing supplier for a ton of brands.
Yep.
And that, for some reason, didn't connect with me. Like, so I really avoided MGP stuff. I looked for anything from Indiana and like avoided it like the plague. Which is funny because there actually was a plague at the time. But anyway, and boy was I wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
MGP could be one of the best distillers on the planet at this point, I think.
Oh, for sure. And I kind of had the same thing when I first started out. Like you buy these bottles of whiskey and they've got all these, stories. And my great granddaddy's daddy's granddaddy's daddy's daddy was baptized in this river, and that's what we named our bourbon after.
Exactly.
And then you find out it was all made up and it was sourced from somebody else. Yeah. And I kind of looked at that as like, oh well, that's weird. Like you're buying somebody else's whiskey and selling it to me.
Yeah.
And now I get it. Like the contract distilling and the sourcing, as long as you're not making up a fake story and pretending it's something that it's not.
They are, yeah, absolutely.
But so one of the things that we're drinking now versus what we were drinking at the beginning of our kind of whiskey journey, for lack of a stupider term, is rye in particular. We've definitely learned more about rye.
Learned that there are different styles of rye. There's what's the barely legal rye, which is a weird term.
Like the 51% rye.
40-something% corn. So it's very bourbon-like.
Yep.
But then there's the 95% rye from MGP in particular.
Yep.
Very different whiskey. And those take finishing in certain types of barrels really well.
Yeah.
So
in particular,
wine finish and rum finish type finished whiskeys are amazing.
Yeah. Yep, so this is a rum
whiskeys.
finished rye, and you and I have both become very, very big fans of that. Finished whiskeys in general, you and I have become very big fans of. That's kind of something where I think at the beginning when I also first got into bourbon, like I liked them, but I didn't know much about them.
So I had a theory about them. I'll just throw this out real quick. So I'd heard this a long time ago about coffee, that when you have flavored coffee, what they did is they took a really bad coffee and they flavored it to try to save it.
To cover it up,
So that was my theory about flavored/finished
Like, are
whiskeys.
they just taking the bad stocks of bourbon and then doing something,
and the
lipstick
answer
on a
is
pig?
yes, they are occasionally.
Yeah, some places I'm sure do that.
But people like Doc Swenson's and some others are finishing really good whiskeys to get them to an amazing place.
Yep, yeah, for sure. So I think when I first started too, the finished whiskey thing kind of was like a...
Well, it's exploded over the past year,
but
I think.
It's gotten much more, I think, widely accepted. I think at first there were a lot of people that were kind of like, finished
flavored
finished bourbon isn't really bourbon, and it's like, people didn't really, I think, give it the credit that it was due. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention, in the very, very beginning of my whiskey drinking, I did explore some flavored whiskeys just for fun. So one day, my friend Matt and I were out and about. We stopped by a liquor store to pick up some beer or whatever, and they had a bottle of peanut butter whiskey sitting up at the front desk, and we're like, peanut butter whiskey? Come on, that's got to be terrible. And we bought a bottle of it just for the hell of it, put it on the rocks, and it was amazing.
It really, really is
So
great.
I do have, bam, this is Scatterbrain. I got started out with Screwball.
They're both really good.
Yeah.
They're not really whiskey-like. They're more just peanut butter flavored
Liqueur
alcohol.
almost. Yeah, exactly.
But
so I'm going to have a little small pour of this.
They actually blend really well with other stuff. So yeah, keep a bottle of this on they're not expensive. Keep it on the bar just to mix it.
This is something you have when you want to have like a dessert.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't have this when you're in the mood for a whiskey, because it's not going to scratch that itch.
You should get a chocolate liqueur and do like a Reese's.
I have. It's really good, actually. It's amazing.
I have to.
So yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, to kind of wrap this up, from where we started was exploring all these different kinds of whiskeys, kind of seemed for both of us. And then once we got into bourbon, it just kind of took off in the sense of like, kind of jumped into the bourbon hunting game a little bit, both of us did. And that was fun because back then stuff was hard to find, but it wasn't impossible. Yeah. You had a fighting chance of finding something. Now you just don't.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit there. Yes, there are the unicorns that you're absolutely never going to see from Buffalo Trace. However, there are absolutely exceptional bottles from Doc Swinson.
Yep.
Elijah Craig.
Yep. Well, that's what I was going to say.
Jack Daniels.
You may not find like the standard unicorn bottles.
Yeah. You're not going to find a George C. Stagg ever.
Yeah, but
there's so many great bottles that are actually available.
Absolutely.
Available.
Yeah, going out bourbon hunting now is finding like stuff like this, like limited edition releases and stuff that has interesting
And the only way you're going to know what to hunt for is to watch our channel and subscribe.
Yeah, and go subscribe to those bourbon guys as well. So I think that's kind of our journey. We've gotten much more into finished stuff, learned a lot more about rye, gotten much more into that, and then of course the high proof, stuff we would have never considered getting into before is kind of our preferred wheelhouse now.
That's so right. Yeah, 100 plus, let's just say.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to challenge all of our friends in WhiskeyTube. We have too many friends to name, which is a great problem to have. We should challenge
Bobby as well.
Yeah. All of our friends in WhiskeyTube and Bobby. So yeah, you guys, if you want to throw out your list of like kind of how your bourbon whiskey journey started, we'd love to hear that. And thank you to those bourbon guys. Go like, subscribe, comment on their channel as well. It's a great channel, so go check them out. And yeah, thank you for watching The Bourbon Note. I'm Ben.
I'm Greg. Till next time. See you next time.